This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Hello, I'm Philip Murphy. I'm Director of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, and I want to tell you just a little bit about our Commonwealth Oral History Project, which makes available the edited transcripts of over 60 interviews with major figures in the Commonwealth since the creation of the Commonwealth Secretariat in 1965. And I really want to explain a little bit about the origins of the project itself. The first thing to say is that myself and members of the team, Dr. Sue Onslow, the lead researcher, and Dr. Ruth Craggs, the co-investigator, we're all active researchers. We've all worked extensively on post-war British and Commonwealth history. And we also interact on a regular basis with journalists and policymakers who want to know a little bit more about the history of the Commonwealth. So we were really creating a tool which we knew would be useful to us and to fellow historians, but which also hopefully will speak to a much wider audience of people for whom the Commonwealth seems just a little bit mysterious. On a perfectly practical level, as historians, we wanted to try to fill a bit of a gap in the evidence available to contemporary historians. We all know that working on contemporary history, diplomatic history, from the perspective of 2016, we have plenty of documents up to the 1970s, beginnings of the 1980s, but then because of things like the 30-year rule, the documentary evidence dries up and one has to look to other sources, open media sources, the interviews we conduct ourselves. And I know that when I was working on my book on the monarchy and the Commonwealth in the post-war era, one of the things I found really useful, and is partly the inspiration for this project, is the British Diplomatic Oral History Project, which is based at Churchill College, Cambridge. And this has made freely available a large number of interviews with former British diplomats and policymakers, conducted by, in many cases, former diplomats themselves, on their experiences. And that sometimes allows us extra information on the kind of inside thinking behind initiatives, say in the 1990s or early 2000s. And we thought, wouldn't it be a great thing to do something similar for the Commonwealth? And I think in the case of the Commonwealth, there is, if you like, an even greater need for this. Because if you think about the case of the Foreign Office and British diplomacy, one answer is just, well, wait until the files are released. And hopefully then, one will get a very clear idea of British government thinking and the sort of behind-the-scenes manoeuvres. I don't think we can be so confident that with the Commonwealth Secretariat, once we do get access to their files, we'll have anything like the same sorts of insights. Diplomatic historians know very well that if you're working on the 1950s, 1960s, and you get a series of files from National Archives, often the first thing you do is to turn to the front and these very extensive minute sheets in which civil servants kind of think aloud about their reasoning. They say, well, this has happened, we could do this, but then there would be these problems, we could do that. Other of their colleagues chip in, and there's a sort of debate, and that gradually gets boiled down to some sort of collective decision, maybe a memo to the minister, maybe a communique, or a telegram. But in the process, the thinking gets sort of slightly ironed out, and some very telling phrases are maybe made a little bit more bland. So that sometimes the thinking behind those decisions is slightly obscured by the time you get to the final telegram. It's what historians often refer to as trying to explore the official mind of the Foreign Office or the Colonial Office, if you like. How does an organisation actually think collectively? Now, my impression of the Commonwealth Secretariat archives is that you don't get quite those sorts of insights. You seem to be dealing with a more reactive organisation. So you'll have lots of invitations to dinner parties, to big functions. You'll have minutes of regular meetings, communiques, etc. But you don't get the same sort of sense of how the Secretariat, or the official Commonwealth, really thought collectively about issues. And of course, in a way, given the nature of the Commonwealth, that's not surprising. One of the things that Commonwealth insiders will often say is that the value that the Commonwealth adds is through a kind of quiet, off-the-radar diplomacy. Informal discussions with world leaders. Someone once said to me, there's a great book to be written about funeral diplomacy. What happens when world leaders gather for the funeral of a major statesman or woman. And the kind of negotiations and informal talks that go on in the background. And you could talk about royal wedding diplomacy, you could talk about diplomacy around major sporting events, which bring a lot of people together. And often that's the sort of thing that the Commonwealth does. And of course there aren't minutes, there aren't official records. And some of the kind of major gatherings of Commonwealth leaders, you know, we talk about the retreat that takes place at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting for the major leaders. Those are off-the-record discussions. We don't really know from any minutes or records what went on. So I think in the case of the Commonwealth, it's particularly important to use oral history to capture both the thinking of decision-making and a lot of that informal diplomacy that goes around it. Again, for an oral history project, it seemed to us that this was exactly the right time to do it. We were coming up to the 50th birthday of the Commonwealth Secretariat in 2015. Many of the major players in the history of the Commonwealth over the last 50 years are still alive. 4 of the 5 Secretary Generals of the Commonwealth. Only one has passed away, Arnold Smith, and yet we were able to talk to people very close to Smith, some of his senior advisors and aides, and get a pretty strong sense of how he worked and what his approach to Commonwealth and to the leadership of the Commonwealth actually was. So we thought, well, this is the right time to do it. We knew it was going to be expensive. It was going to involve our researchers really going around the world, tracking people down, talking to them. So we needed a major source of funding, and we looked to the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council, the AHRC, who in the end we're extremely grateful to them, gave us a major grant of nearly £400,000. When we were submitting that grant, of course, you know, one has to be cautious, but we thought we had a very good proposal here. When you're assessing Research Council grants, you're often told to look for the 3 Ps: the project, the people, and the place. And we thought that on all those grounds, we had a good case to make. In terms of the people, as I said, we are active researchers in the research team with a track record in the field, but we were also able to draw upon a wide range of historians and practitioners to advisors. We had a separate advisory board in which some very senior historians very kindly agreed to take part, and it was chaired by Mr. Richard Bourne, who's played a leading role in a lot of Commonwealth civil society organisations. So we felt we had the people there. The project, as I say, we were very confident about, and the place. The project operates out of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, which since 1949 has been a unique focus in the UK and actually around the world for the study of the Commonwealth. The Institute has an excellent track record for carrying out major research projects in this area. One of the big ones over the last few decades was British Documents on the End of Empire, a multi-volume series of documentary collections on the decolonisation of British colonies. And that in its latter stages was also funded by the HRC. We have, as I said, excellent networks amongst historians and policymakers who we could draw in to advisors and helpers. And of course it's no disadvantage, frankly, being based in central London, close to Whitehall, close to the Commonwealth High Commissions, and of course also people all the time travelling through London. So we were maybe able to save a little bit on airfares just by being opportunistic and trying to get to people while they were passing through. At the same time, as anyone who's put one of these projects together will know, it's a very complicated business. And again, at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies and the School of Advanced Study, of which it's a part, we had an excellent administrative team. Our school managers, Paul Sullivan and Chloe Peters, were tremendously helpful. Our research and our finance team, and also our technical teams, in terms of drawing up the specifications for the website and the storage of the transcripts, both in electronic form and in hard form. And of course we also worked with Senate House Libraries on that, and with the British Library. A project needs a research question, and our research question was, I guess, a very practical one again. The overarching question is really, well, what difference has the Commonwealth made over the last 50 years? What can it really claim to have achieved? That might sound fairly simple, fairly basic, but if you look at major surveys of international relations, international history since the Second World War, often the Commonwealth will be mentioned only fleetingly, if at all. We wanted to know, well, does that underestimate the value and the contribution of the Commonwealth? And it's worth saying that because of this, this is unashamedly what you might call an elite project. We are talking to Commonwealth Prime Ministers, Foreign Ministers, leading figures in Commonwealth civil society organisations, former Commonwealth Secretary-Generals and members of the Commonwealth Secretariat. It's not a view from the ground about what the Commonwealth meant to ordinary people. That's a useful project that is still to be done. But it was sufficiently ambitious in terms of actually tracking down those senior people from around the world to keep us very busy. We obviously wanted to choose witnesses who collectively would cover a wide range of issues. So not just the kind of the big famous signature issues of the Commonwealth, like the fight against apartheid in South Africa, or Ian Smith regime in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. Wanted to look at other issues which have been important in their own ways, although maybe less newsworthy, like debt relief, development, climate change, the concerns of small states. Half of Commonwealth states, over half of Commonwealth states, are small states. So we wanted to get that thematic spread in our interviews. But we also, and this has turned out to be quite an important distinction, wanted to talk both to Commonwealth insiders and those outside the organisation. As you look through the interviews, you might notice quite a clear distinction in those two sets of interviewees. It's quite easy from the perspective of the Commonwealth insider, someone working at the Commonwealth Secretariat or in a major civil society organisation, to say, well, we must have achieved something because my diary was always full. We always had lots of meetings, conferences, we discussed this, we went around the world, we did that. It's interesting to talk to maybe foreign ministers, prime ministers, who are dealing with a very wide range of international and domestic questions, and for whom maybe the Commonwealth doesn't register so much, or maybe doesn't seem to them particularly important at all. We wanted to get contrasting views here. And that's the final thing maybe to say for me in the introduction, that again, what we wanted to do was to create a research. What we wanted to do was to create a research resource. It will be interpreted in lots of different ways. Often the interviewees disagree with each other. This isn't some sort of official history of the Commonwealth. It's something that historians can come to, or policymakers or journalists, and really make their own minds up about what the Commonwealth has achieved from some of the interviews that we have here. Thank you.